Jonathan Carlyle was a man who seemingly had it all, a billionaire real estate mogul with an empire stretching from the skyscrapers of New York to luxury resorts in the Caribbean. Charismatic, charming, and relentless, Jonathan's life was a constant parade of success, power, and wealth. Married to Olivia, a former supermodel turned philanthropist, Jonathan's image was that of a man with a picture-perfect life. However, beneath the glossy surface, Jonathan was hiding a dark secret, a torrid affair with Naomi, the wife of his best friend, Daniel King. Daniel and Jonathan had been friends since college. They built their fortunes side by side, each becoming the godfather to the other's children, and for years, their bond seemed unbreakable. But Jonathan's charm had ensnared Naomi, a stunning and intelligent woman who was trapped in a loveless marriage with Daniel. The affair began innocently enough, with harmless flirtations during dinner parties, but soon turned into clandestine meetings in penthouse suites and luxurious hideaways. Jonathan thought he could keep his affair secret forever, but secrets have a way of surfacing. On a warm summer evening in 2023, Jonathan received a call that would change everything. Naomi was hysterical. "Jonathan, I think someone knows. I found a letter in my car. It's threatening to expose us," she whispered, her voice shaking with fear. The letter was explicit, detailing their affair in ways that suggested they were being watched closely. Jonathan immediately suspected Daniel, but he knew better than to confront his old friend without proof. As paranoia set in, Jonathan hired a private investigator to uncover the identity of the letter's author. Meanwhile, he assured Naomi that everything would be fine, but inside, he felt the walls closing in. The affair continued, albeit under the weight of constant anxiety. Jonathan and Naomi took even greater precautions, meeting only in carefully planned locations, using burner phones, and avoiding any public interactions that might arouse suspicion. But just as things seemed to be, Jonathan's world was rocked once more. On the morning of October 12th, Daniel was found dead in his luxury apartment in Tribeca. The initial reports suggested a robbery gone wrong. Daniel's watch, cash, and several pieces of expensive jewelry were missing, but there was something off about the scene. Daniel had been shot twice, once in the chest and once in the head, a professional execution rather than a simple burglary. Police immediately launched an investigation, but there were no suspects and no clear motive. Jonathan attended Daniel's funeral, keeping up appearances, but inside, he was terrified. The affair was now stained with blood, and the specter of Daniel's death haunted him at every turn. Olivia, grieving the loss of a close family friend, noticed Jonathan's uncharacteristic silence, but he brushed it off as shock. Days turned into weeks, and the police made little progress. Then the case took a shocking turn. Surveillance footage from the luxury building where Daniel was murdered revealed a figure slipping into his apartment late at night. The figure was masked, dressed in black and unrecognizable, but one detail stood out. The intruder's build matched Jonathan's almost perfectly. As the police worked tirelessly to enhance the footage and identify the intruder, Jonathan found himself at the center of a rapidly tightening noose. He tried to maintain his composure, but whispers of his involvement began to spread. The media latched onto the story of a potential love triangle gone wrong, and speculation ran rampant. Then came the bombshell. A text message between Jonathan and Naomi was leaked to the press, hinting at plans to take care of the problem. Suddenly, Jonathan's entire empire was at risk, and his once orderly life was descending into chaos. The leaked messages between Jonathan and Naomi threw the investigation into overdrive. The police quickly obtained a warrant to search Jonathan's properties and seized his phone and computer. Jonathan, once confident in his control over every aspect of his life, found himself cornered like never before. Every whisper, every curious look in the office, and every question from the media felt like another nail in his coffin. Jonathan's lawyer, Paul McGregor, was one of the best in the business, known for keeping the wealthy and powerful out of jail. Paul assured Jonathan that there was no direct evidence linking him to Daniel's murder, but Jonathan could feel the tides turning against him. The police were zeroing in on his connections, trying to piece together the fractured puzzle of Daniel's last days. The private investigator Jonathan had hired to find the letter's author finally came back with news, and it was worse than Jonathan had anticipated. The letters had been traced back to a burner phone purchased under a fake name, but the trail led directly to Naomi's apartment. She had been trying to break things off with Jonathan, but the letters were never meant to be sent, just a dramatic cry for help that had spiraled out of control. Jonathan's heart sank. He was more entangled in this web of lies than he had realized. Meanwhile, Naomi was spiraling. The leaked messages had painted her as the ultimate femme fatale, and she became a tabloid sensation overnight. Paparazzi camped outside her home, and every aspect of her life was under scrutiny. Unlike Jonathan, who could hide behind his lawyers and the high walls of his estates, Naomi had nowhere to run. She was losing control, and in her desperation, she made a reckless move. She contacted the police, offering to cooperate in exchange for immunity. Naomi's testimony was a bombshell. She confessed to the affair, confirming that she had sent the threatening letters to herself and Jonathan, but she denied any involvement in Daniel's murder. She claimed that Jonathan had become increasingly paranoid, speaking about Daniel as an obstacle that needed to be removed. Naomi tearfully insisted that she had no knowledge of who killed her husband, but painted a picture of Jonathan as an unhinged man, desperate to protect his reputation and wealth. Armed with Naomi's statement, the police moved swiftly. Jonathan was arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to commit murder. The headlines exploded: "Billionaire love triangle, Carlyle arrested in best friend's death." Jonathan maintained his innocence, but the court of public opinion had already made up its mind. His face was plastered on every news channel, and his business empire began to crumble as investors pulled out in droves. In a shocking twist, investigators found financial transactions between Jonathan and a known hitman, Anthony "Tony" Valente. Valente was a former Special Forces operative turned underworld enforcer, and his reputation for carrying out high-stakes hits was well known to law enforcement. Bank records showed that Jonathan had transferred a substantial amount to Valente just days before Daniel's murder. The police believed they had found their smoking gun. Jonathan's lawyer fought back, arguing that the payment was unrelated, a consultation fee for a security project Jonathan was planning for his company. But the timing was damning, and the evidence seemed to stack against him. Jonathan was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. As the trial date approached, Jonathan's once supportive family and friends began to distance themselves. Olivia filed for divorce, taking their children and moving back to her family estate in Europe. Alone and desperate, Jonathan tried to reach out to Naomi, but she was under police protection, cooperating as the star witness against him. With everything on the line, Jonathan took a gamble. He decided to take the stand in his own defense, a risky move that could either save him or seal his fate. He testified about his friendship with Daniel, his affair with Naomi, and the mounting pressures that had led to their downfall. Jonathan insisted he had nothing to do with Daniel's death and that the payments to Valente were a coincidence. His words, however, sounded hollow in the courtroom filled with those who once admired him. The courtroom was packed on the first day of Jonathan Carlyle's trial. Reporters jostled for seats, eager to catch a glimpse of the fallen billionaire whose rise and fall had captivated the nation. The prosecution painted Jonathan as a man driven by greed, lust, and an insatiable need for control, a man who would do anything to eliminate anyone who stood in his way, including his best friend. The evidence seemed damning: the affair, the payments to a hitman, and Naomi's devastating testimony. It was a perfect storm of scandal, betrayal, and murder. Naomi's appearance on the witness stand was the most anticipated moment of the trial. Dressed conservatively, she looked nothing like the glamorous socialite the tabloids had portrayed. Her voice trembled as she recounted the months leading up to Daniel's death, describing the fear and paranoia that had gripped both her and Jonathan. She spoke of Jonathan's increasing obsession with controlling every aspect of their affair and how he had grown to view Daniel not just as a rival, but as an obstacle that needed to be removed. Under cross-examination, Jonathan's lawyer, Paul McGregor, relentlessly attacked Naomi's credibility. He highlighted inconsistencies in her statements and pointed out that she stood to gain significantly from both Daniel's death and Jonathan's downfall. "Isn't it true that you've been manipulating both men all along?" Paul pressed. "You sent the threatening letters to escalate the tension. You cooperated with the police to save yourself. Isn't this all part of your plan?" Naomi broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Her emotional outburst split the courtroom. Some saw her as a victim caught in a deadly game, while others viewed her as the true mastermind pulling the strings behind the scenes. It was a pivotal moment, but it wasn't enough to completely discredit her testimony. The prosecution then turned to their star evidence, Tony Valente, the hitman. Though Valente refused to testify, his criminal record, the financial link to Jonathan, and his known modus operandi painted a damning picture. The prosecution argued that Jonathan had used Valente to eliminate Daniel, and the financial transactions were the key to proving it. However, a breakthrough came when Paul McGregor revealed a series of encrypted emails between Valente and an unknown third party. The emails detailed a plot to frame Jonathan for Daniel's murder, orchestrated by someone with insider knowledge of Jonathan's business and personal life. The defense managed to decrypt the messages just days before they were to be presented in court, revealing a shocking twist. Naomi was the third party. In the emails, Naomi had posed as Jonathan, coordinating the payment and providing Valente with details about Daniel's schedule and security protocols. Naomi had played both sides, using her access to Jonathan to set him up as the fall guy while keeping her hands clean. This revelation flipped the case on its head. Naomi's calculated manipulation of Jonathan, Daniel, and even Valente exposed her as the true architect of the deadly scheme. The courtroom buzzed with shock and disbelief as Paul presented the decrypted messages, meticulously outlining how Naomi had engineered every step of the crime. Jonathan, who had been painted as the prime villain, was now revealed as another pawn in Naomi's elaborate game. However, the prosecution was not ready to let Jonathan off the hook so easily. They argued that while Naomi had masterminded the frame-up, Jonathan's actions and decisions had still played a crucial role. He had funded Valente, albeit unknowingly, and had allowed his affair and paranoia to lead him down a dark path. The jury was left to decide whether Jonathan was guilty of conspiracy or simply a victim of his own recklessness. As closing arguments were made, the tension in the room was palpable. Paul McGregor made an impassioned plea, arguing that Jonathan had been blinded by love and fear, manipulated by the one person he had trusted above all others. He painted Jonathan as a deeply flawed but ultimately human figure who had lost everything to Naomi's cunning. The prosecution, however, hammered home the idea that Jonathan's arrogance and disregard for his friend's life had directly contributed to the tragedy. Even if he hadn't pulled the trigger, his actions had set the deadly events in motion. The jury deliberated for 2 long days. Finally, the verdict was read. Jonathan Carlyle was found not guilty of murder, but guilty of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. While he would not spend his life in prison, his sentence included significant jail time, financial penalties, and the complete dismantling of his empire. Naomi, who had tried to save herself at every turn, was arrested on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to murder. As Jonathan was led out of the courtroom, he glanced at Naomi one last time. She stood in the defendant's box, defiant and unbroken, her once flawless facade now exposed for the world to see. It was the end of a saga that had destroyed 2 families and left a trail of betrayal, greed, and shattered lives. Jonathan's story became a cautionary tale of how power, deception, and misplaced trust could lead even the most successful individuals to ruin. He had lost everything: his best friend, his family, his fortune, and his freedom, because he had let his desires cloud his judgment. As he walked through the prison gates to start his sentence, Jonathan couldn't help but reflect on the price he had paid. In the end, the affair that began as a thrilling secret had consumed him, revealing the darkest sides of human nature and the devastating consequences of unchecked ambition.